Good evening, everybody. I apologize for the technical problems. Let's get started. This is a three-part mini-series, which is meant to explore the idea of chosenness. You know, we refer to ourselves as the chosen people. And also historically, we've been known as the chosen people. And that's a term that I think some people, many Jews actually find somewhat, I'm not sure what the right term for it is, but a lot of people are quite uncomfortable with the idea of us being the chosen people. It sort of seems perhaps arrogant in some people's minds. Maybe it conjures up images of some kind of supremacy or some sort of elitism. But we can't deny that that is what our sources say. We speak about this in our tefillot, on Yom Tov, Ata bechartanu mikol ha'amim, you've chosen us from among all the nations, Asher bachar banu mikol am, and in many, many other places we say this. So what I'd like to do over the next this mini series is to try to understand what that term actually means by going back to the very beginning. We're in the middle of reading Sefer Bereishit now, and this series was originally scheduled to be taught during the parshiot of I think it was Vayera and Chayei Sarah and Toldot, around there when we talked about Avraham and Yitzchak. Because of everything going on in Israel, we decided to push it off a little bit. So now in Kriyat Torah time, we've already gotten up to Yaakov, but we're going to look at tonight. We're going to spend these three sessions looking at each of the three Avot. We'll start tonight with Avraham, and God willing, next week Yitzchak, and 2 weeks from now Yaakov. And we'll try to understand the process of chosenness as it unfolds in the story of Sefer Bereishit. We'll try to understand the significance of the choice of each of the three Avot, and what the difference is between them, why we needed three Avot, why it wasn't enough simply to choose Avraham, what's happening at each stage in that process. And to do that, we're going to use two tools. We're going to be looking at some texts, and we're also going to try to take some virtual tours. We're going to do the type of things that I like to do with people when I'm able to in real life on location. We're gonna do it with the use of some photos and maps and a little bit of videos. Tonight it'll be more photos and maps, and next week's and the following week a little bit more text and some videos. But we're gonna try to make it as if we're traveling around the country, going to the places where the Avot were, and trying to understand what the sources are telling us. Okay, so we will start with Avraham from the very beginning. Avraham was told, as we know, Lech lecha me'artzecha, go forth, leave your land, leave your home, and go to what it seems was an unknown destination. Here's a map that tries to suggest the path that Avraham took, starting from Ur Kasdim, which is where he was from. This is the majority opinion. There is another view that puts Ur somewhere up here in the area of modern-day Turkey, but the more common opinion is that it's all the way down here in today's southern Iraq. And from there, Avram set off on this long journey, already with his father, the first stage of the journey. He came to Haran, and from Haran, he was told, Lech lecha. Okay, so let's read these psukim, and let's try to understand what the significance is of what Avraham was being told. Okay, he was told, Lech lecha me'artzecha u'mimoladetcha u'mibeit avicha el haaretz asher areka. He was told to leave his homeland, to leave everything behind, and to go to some sort of unknown destination. El haaretz asher areka, to the land that I will show you. And he was also told what the purpose of this journey was to be. We're talking here about a man who is 75 years old, and he's told to take just his immediate family, his wife, and a few other people, but to cut himself off from his entire life, from his brothers, from his entire extended family, from the place he's been living for a very long time, and to just leave, to set off on a journey. And why? He's told, Ve'escha legoy gadol, I shall make you into a great nation. If you do this, if you leave and you go off and you follow the path that I'm asking you to follow, this will be the beginning of something where you will become a great nation. Va'avarechecha, and I will bless you. Va'agadla shemecha, and I'll make you famous. So Avraham is promised all of these benefits. He's going to be blessed, and he's going to become famous, and he's going to be the father of a great nation. And as we'll discuss more in a minute, that was particularly astounding to him, assumedly because he had no children. He's a 75-year-old man married to a 65-year-old woman, and they have no children. But Hashem tells him, go, follow me, and I'll make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. And then the verse continues with a command, Veheye bracha, and you shall be a blessing. And that's a little bit strange. I understand what it means to be blessed. But what does it mean to be a blessing? What was meant when Hashem told Avraham, you must be a blessing? The next pasuk, I think, explains that to us and explains to us the purpose for this whole thing. Pasuk says, Va'avarcha mevarechecha umekalelcha aor. Those who bless you, I will bless them. Those who curse you, I will curse them. In other words, you will be the determinant for who gets blessed and who gets cursed. You will be a blessing. Those who bless you will be blessed. Those who curse you, those who oppose you, will be punished, will be harmed. And what's the purpose of it all? V'nivrechu v'cha kol mishpechot ha'adama. Through you, all of the families of the earth, in other words, all of the nations will be blessed. Now, I don't know if everyone here is familiar with this, but I have a website with a series of videos that I put up fairly recently, which I'm going to put now. I don't know if yes, I can. I'm going to put right now the link to that website in the chat, and I encourage everybody. Just having trouble finding the chat on. Okay, here it is. Sorry, chat. Here's the website. Don't go to it now, but at some point you can check out this website, Am Levadad, and that should take you to my website where you can watch this series of videos if you're interested. A lot of what we're going to be exploring in these videos, in these classes, is going to essentially be going a little bit deeper into the things that I discussed there. And one of the points that I made in those videos, and that you can, again, watch more about or read more about on my website, is the fact that this is a very different understanding of what it means to be the chosen people than what most of us think. Most of us assume, and many non-Jews also, when they hear the term chosen people, also assume that the idea of the chosen people somehow means that we're more important than everybody else, in the sense that really the world is meant to be for our benefit, or that we have some kind of unique status that makes us better than everybody else, and that really, therefore, it's all about us, and the rest of the world is not so important. But this pasuk tells us the exact opposite. It is true that we are very important, we being the descendants of Avraham. And even though Avraham had many descendants, as we're going to ultimately discuss next week and the following week, it ultimately comes down to the descendants of Avraham and Yitzchak as opposed to Yishmael, and Yaakov as opposed to Esav, and therefore it's ultimately talking about us, Am Yisrael, or those who are today called the Jewish people. We are very, very, very important, but not because we're meant to be above everybody else in the sense that everything's about us. It's actually the opposite. We are meant to be above everyone else in the sense that we are meant to be leading everybody else and helping everybody else. And ultimately, the choice of Avraham is not about Avraham and his descendants. It's about the entire world. Again, that's very different than the way many Jews have been trained to think, but that's exactly what this verse says. The reason why Avraham was chosen was v'nivrechu v'cha kol mishpechot ha'adama. All the nations of the world will be blessed through you. Exactly what that means, we'll see in a few minutes. But we're then told that Vayelech Avram kasher diber elav Hashem Vayelech ito Lot. Avram went, and his nephew Lot followed him. And it says here that he was 75 years old when he left Haran. And now we have Vayikach Avram et Sarai ishto, v'et Lot ben Achiv et kol rechusham asher rechashu, v'et hanefesh asher asu b'Haran, v'yelchu lalechet arza Canaan, v'yavo arza Canaan. Okay, so they all went to the land of Canaan. And then we read Vayavor Avram ba'aretz ad mekom Shechem ad Elon Moreh, v'Kanaani az ba'aretz. Okay, so let's take a quick look at where that is. I have a slide, which is actually not the next slide, so we're gonna skip to it and we'll come back. No, one second, I went too far. Okay, maybe I don't have a slide for that. Okay, we'll get back to that in a second, sorry. But in any case, sorry, okay. All right. Avraham came to Shechem, and he was told there, Shechem is the first place in the land of Israel that he came to. We'll see the map a little bit later on. Avraham came to Shechem, and there he was given a very, very specific promise. He gets there, and we see here in this pasuk, Vayavor Avram ba'aretz ad mekom Shechem ad Elon Moreh. And when he gets there, HaKnaani az ba'aretz. Avram looks around and sees that he's in a land that's already inhabited by Canaanites. And remember that pasuk, because we're going to come back to that in a few minutes. And Avram is told, Hashem appears to him, and he's told, L'zaracha etenet ha'aretz hazot. So suddenly, Avram was given two promises. He already had the promise that if he goes off to the land that I will show you, he'll become a great nation. And here he was promised that this is the land in which that's going to happen. Avraham now understands that he's going to settle in this land. This land will belong to his descendants. Notice, by the way, it doesn't say yet that this land belongs to him. Only in the future, Lizaracha, to your descendants, I will give this land. And what does Avraham respond? He responds immediately by building a Mizbeach. And then we're told that he travels on to Beit El. We'll get there in a few more minutes. But let's just stop and understand. And in a minute, we're going to go back to those slides that I flipped to, and we're going to see exactly where Avraham was standing outside of Shechem. But when he comes into the land and he's told that this is the place that he's going to ultimately inherit, why is this significant to us? There's a fundamental principle which the Ramban, Nachmanides, articulates in his commentary on this pasuk. And we're told here, let's just read a few lines of this. Omer lecha klal tavinoto. I'm going to tell you, says the Ramban, a very important principle. B'chol haparshiot habot. This really explains the entire purpose of the book of Bereishit. Everything about Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, hu inyan gadol, and it's a very fundamental principle, which said, Kol ma she'ira la'avot siman labanim. Whatever happened to the Avot, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who were actual individuals, they were single people, they were human beings, whatever happened to them, what's sometimes called Ma'aseh Avot, is siman lebanim. It's a sign, it's a sort of prelude to what's going to happen to their descendants. In other words, what Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov do is sort of a foreshadowing for what's going to happen later on in history. And the Ramban has a mystical explanation for why this needs to be, and there are other explanations for it as well. But the concept of Ma'aseh Avot Siman Labanim, that what happens to the ancestors is a foreshadowing of what's going to happen to their descendants. That is a very powerful principle that, first of all, as the Ramban says, helps us understand the purpose of Sefer Bereishit and helps us understand things that we read later on in the Torah and later on in Tanach. But much more than that, it also helps us understand things that happen far after Tanach. Because the events that happen to the Avot and the situations that they find themselves in wind up repeating themselves again and again and again throughout history. And let's just pause for a minute and let's think about what we just read. Avram came to Eretz Canaan, a 75-year-old man, married to a 65-year-old woman without children. He gets here and the Torah tells us that the first thing he sees is Knaani az ba'aretz. The first thing Avraham sees is that there were already people living in the land. And I've often imagined Avraham traveling, he was told that he has to go on his journey to this destination that, when he gets there, he'll find out where it is, El Haaretz Asher Areka. And I've often considered what might have been going through his head as he entered the land of Canaan. There's a little bit of a question as to whether he knew where the destination was or not. But let's assume, according to the simple reading, that he wasn't clear that this was the destination. And I've often imagined that he gets to the area of Shechem and he looks around and he sees that this is an area that's already inhabited. There are people living there. They have cities. They have farms. And I often imagine him saying to himself, well, this clearly isn't the place because there are already people living here. And imagining himself continuing down the road. And suddenly Hashem appears to him and tells him, so he's promised that his children who don't exist will inherit this land, which is belonging to someone else. And the contrast between what he's told and the promise that he's given versus the reality that he sees in front of him must have been very, very jarring. And that situation repeats itself throughout history. One of the bizarre aspects of being what I call the Am Levadad, this nation that has such an unusual history and such an unusual role in the world. One of the unusual aspects of this is that unlike any other nation, we have such a hard time holding on to our homeland. And this situation of understanding, the situation that Avraham found himself in, where he understands that this land is his, and this is the land that he's supposed to inherit, but it doesn't seem possible at all, that's repeated again and again and again throughout history. When his children eventually will come out of Egypt, they're going to face the same situation. A nation of slaves that escaped from slavery, running back to a homeland that they've been told is theirs, even though none of them have ever been there, but they can't go back to where they came from either. And when they get there, they find that they have to fight wars against people who say, hey, you're invading our country. And when we came back to build the second Beit HaMikdash after the Babylonian exile, we had a very similar experience. And in our own generation as well, as we know all too well, as we're experiencing all too well during these very difficult days, this same situation is playing out. We showed up in Eretz Yisrael. We started coming back here 150 years ago or so from all over the world. And we came here with two very clear understandings. We came here with the understanding that this land, which was promised already to the Avot, we just read the promise to Avraham, and later on we'll see it also about Yitzchak and about Yaakov, and throughout the rest of the Tanach, we've been told that this is our land. We know that this is our land, and we know that for centuries, everywhere we've been in the world, every Beit Knesset we built anywhere in the world faced Eretz Yisrael, specifically faced Yerushalayim, and every tefillah we always mentioned Yerushalayim and prayed to come back to Eretz Yisrael, and every Birkat HaMazon, and every wedding we broke a glass to remember Yerushalayim, and every Yom Kippur and every Pesach we said L'Shana Haba Yerushalayim. So we had this very deep sense that this land belongs to us, and we also had a very clear understanding that we can't really live securely anywhere else in the world. Wherever we went throughout the exile, we settled for a period of time, but eventually we were expelled, or worse, or massacred, or who knows what. And we came back to the land of Israel, understanding this is where we had to be. And we spent the last 150 years struggling for the land, and that struggle is not over. Okay, so this first point is built in from the very, very beginning. Ma'aseh Avot Siman Lebanim. The significance of that we'll also have to return to as this idea develops further. Okay, so before going on and following Avraham further on in his journey, I'd like to spend a little bit of just a few minutes looking at this area where Avraham was, the area of Shechem, and understanding that this area became important not only much later on in history, meaning in our own generation, but in the Torah itself. If we go to the book of Dvarim, this is when Moshe Rabbeinu, this is after the descendants of the Avot went down to Egypt, came out of Egypt, 40 years in the desert, and now they're about to finally enter Eretz Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu told them, Re'ei anochi notein lefnechem hayom bracha u'klala. He said, there's two choices. You can be blessed or you can be cursed. Echoing what was said about the other nations to Avraham. Other nations are going to either be blessed or cursed based on how they interact with Avraham and his descendants. and Avraham's descendants themselves will be blessed and cursed according to a very simple formula. Eta bracha asher tishmeu mitzvot Hashem Elokeichem asher anochi mitzavetchem hayom. If you follow the mitzvot of the Torah, you'll be blessed. V'aklala im lo tishmeu mitzvot Hashem Elokeichem v'sartem min haderech. If you abandon the Torah, then God forbid you will be cursed. And then we're given a command. When you do go into this land, Moshe Rabbeinu is talking about after his own death, just a few months from when he gave this speech, he said, you're going to go into the land of Israel. You're going to have to perform a ceremony, which we'll see in a minute. The Torah spells out in greater detail towards the end of the book of Dvarim. But that ceremony is going to have brachot and klalot, blessings and curses, and the brachot are going to be given on a place called Har Grizim, and the klalot on a place called Har Eval. And since they didn't have ways back then, and they didn't know exactly how to get there, Moshe Rabbeinu gives them directions. How are you going to get to these two mountains, Har Grizim and Har Eval? Halohema be'ever hayarden. They're on the other side of the Jordan River. Moshe at this point was on the eastern side of the Jordan River. And he's telling the people that they're going to have to go across to the western side. Acharei derech mevo hashemesh. At the end of the road of the setting sun, a road that travels towards the west. Derech mevo hashemesh. Be'eretz haknaani. Mul hagilgal etzel elonei moreh. Near a place called Elon Moreh. And Elon Moreh should send off bells in our minds, because we read a few minutes ago that Shechem was called Elon Moreh. We read in the beginning, Vayavor Avraham ba'aretz ad Mikom Shechem ad Elon Moreh. So we understand now that Moshe is commanding them to go back to the same entry point where Avraham first entered the land of Israel. The first place that Avraham came to was Shechem, and he's telling them to follow this road called Derech Mevo HaShemesh and go to the area of Shechem. And here's a map. Here's a map that explains exactly how it works. This is the Yarden. This is the Jordan River. This is the road called Derech Mevo HaShemesh. It's also known as the road of Nachal Tirza. It's also known today as Road 57. This is what we call today Road 90, the Jordan Valley Road. Those who are familiar, it's the road that if you're driving, let's say, from Jerusalem up towards Tiberia, towards Tiberias, you go out towards the Dead Sea, and then you make a left and you go up what's called Road 90. About halfway between Jerusalem and Tiberia, there's this turnoff, Derech Mevo HaShemesh. And although, because part of it's under Palestinian control, we can't drive this way directly today, unfortunately. But if you would drive this way, you would get straight to the road hooks around, and it gets you to Shechem. And right by Shechem are these two mountains, Har Grizim and Har Eval. And let me show you some pictures that I took from this mountain. There's a mountain here called Har Kabir, or Jabal Kabir, it says here in the Arabic name. And this is a mountain where you have a beautiful, commanding view of the area. And if you look here, this is an actual picture. I took this picture myself, standing up there. This is the road that Avraham would have come up, and the road that later on Moshe Rabbeinu commanded the people to come up. This road called Derech Mevo HaShemesh, or the road of Nachal Tirza. You can see it's a very beautiful, fertile valley even today, and the road continues over in this direction, and we get to this mountain that we call Har Eval. And there they were meant to perform a ceremony, which is spelled out for us here at the end of Dvarim, and it tells us what they have to do. It says, "Vaya bayom asher tavru et hayarden." When you cross the river, you have to set up big stones, avanim gdolot, v'chatavta aleim, and you have to write the Torah on those stones. And then it says, "V'haya ba'avrechem et hayarden, takimu et ha'avanim ha'ela asher anochi mitzaveh etchem hayom b'har Eval v'sadeta otam basir." You have to place these stones with words of Torah written on them on Har Eval. And there they were supposed to conduct the ceremony of the blessings and curses. And if you think about it, what they were being asked to do at this point was essentially to retrace Avraham's steps entering to the country in the same place, the area of Shechem. the same place that he was, that he entered the land. They're to go up to that high mountain, Har Eval, which overlooks the city of Shechem and the area of Ein Lon Moreh. And they were to put up this monument, which basically has words of Torah on it. I've often thought of it as sort of parallel to the Statue of Liberty, right? Many people, including some of my ancestors who came to the United States in the early 20th century as immigrants, and they sailed across the ocean to this great land, were greeted by this symbol, right? There was this big statue in the water before they even reached the United States itself. They saw this great statue that basically announced to them, what is this country about? This country is about liberty. And it was placed there in order to sort of make that announcement. This is what our country is about. This is our Statue of Liberty. As we entered the land following in the footsteps of Avraham, we were told to build this monument, basically, with the words of the Torah on it. What is the purpose of being in Eretz Yisrael? Why are we here? We're here in order to fulfill that which was given to Avraham, the fulfillment of which is meant to bring blessings to us, and our blessings ultimately are meant to become blessings for the entire world, which we still have to explain how that's meant to happen. So we did that, and then we were commanded to do something else as well. Uvanita sham mizbeach l'Hashem Elokecha. You have to also build there a mizbeach, an altar to God. Mizbach avanim lo tanif aleihem barzel. It has to be following the laws of the mizbeach in the Torah, which is that it has to be made of uncut stones that have not been touched by iron. V'ha'alita alav olot l'Hashem Elokecha v'zavachta shlamim v'achalta sham v'samachta l'fnei Hashem Elokecha. And you have to offer sacrifices there in order to celebrate the covenant that you're entering into with God. So Avram entered from this area, and Bnei Yisrael were told that when they enter Eretz Yisrael, they have to go back to that same place and enact this ceremony and put up a monument with the Torah written on it and build a mizbeach, a huge altar on which they are to offer sacrifices. And incredibly, in the year 1980, Israeli archaeologist Adam Zartal, Zichrono Livracha, did an excavation on Har Eval, and he uncovered what most archaeologists acknowledge is, in fact, the Mizbeach, the altar that Yoshua built. It's dated archaeologically to the time of Yoshua bin Nun, and I have here a short little video that someone took with a drone. And this is Har Eval. This is the mountain. The Mizbeach is somewhere around here, and if we zoom in to that thing, we can actually see what the Mizbeach looks like. So I'll show you this quick little video taken by a drone of the actual Mizbeach. See that it has a ramp leading up to it. Ramp leading up to it. And together with the Mizbeach itself, they also found the bones of many animals, many of which were burnt, and clear evidence that it was used as a site of worship. And therefore, this seems to be the actual Mizbeach that was talked about. Okay, so Avraham was told that he has to build this Mizbeach. I'm sorry, Avraham was told that he has to go into the land. When he got there, he built a Mizbeach. And then we're told that Avraham traveled further on into the land. And let's follow Avraham now on his journey into the land. And we'll do so by driving on what we call today Road 60. Road 60, which is basically the same road. Road 60 is the road that goes through the area known today as Judea and Samaria. If we entered from Shechem and we go south, so we are going to go following along that road until very recently. That road would have taken us through a village called Chawara, which you may have heard about in the news lately. For many years, we drove through there. And in the last year or two, unfortunately, it has become very unsafe in Chawara, and there were a number of deadly terrorist attacks that took place there. There is now a bypass road that at least part of which is open, and the rest will be open very soon. So it is now hopefully a little bit easier to get to and from the area of Har Grizim and Har Eval than it was before. So we'll drive on that bypass road. We'll get here to something called Tzomet Tapuach, which is just south of Shechem. And there we have the I Love Shomron sign in the traffic circle. And if we drive a little further south, we're going to pass a place called Shiloh. Shiloh, which would be off to our left as we're driving south from the area of Shechem. Now, Shiloh is not mentioned in the book of Bereishit at all, but Shiloh, of course, became very important later in history during the days of Yoshua and in the several hundred years following Yoshua, because it is there, as this pasuk tells us, that Yoshua brought the Mishkan, the tabernacle that Moshe had built in the Midbar, was brought to Shiloh. We have here on the left a picture of the site in contemporary times that's believed to be the actual site outside of the ancient city of Shiloh, where the Mishkan stood for several hundred years. And on the right here, we have a artist's rendition of what that Mishkan looked like. It was very interesting. It was not the portable, according to the rabbis, it was not the portable structure that we read about in the book of Shemot that traveled with Bnei Yisrael through the wilderness. Rather, it was a stone building, more permanent than the portable structure. However, in spite of the fact that it was a stone building, it did not have a roof. The roof was the same curtains or fabric, sort of tent-type structure that had existed in the Midbar. And so we understand that Shiloh was something in between the temporary structure that was being brought through the Midbar and the Beit HaMikdash that would be built in the future. And even though we're talking right now about the Avot and Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and they didn't build a Beit HaMikdash or a Mishkan, these are things that were commanded much later on in history, it will become clear that the Beit HaMikdash that would ultimately be built was a central part of the mission for which Avraham was originally chosen. And why is that? In order to understand the significance of the Mishkan that would eventually be built in Shiloh, which we're up to on our virtual tour, and the Beit HaMikdash that would later be built in Yerushalayim, we have to continue following Avraham past Shiloh. So we're going to go further south now. We're going south here towards Psagot and Yerushalayim, and we're going to get to a place called Beit El. And here we're going to make a right turn off the road, and we're going to go visit Beit El. If we drive into Beit El, we'll enter the modern Yishuv of Beit El, and we'll drive through the modern settlement, and we'll get to an area where we can sort of have a bit of an understanding what the significance of Beit El was to Avraham. So before we see the pictures of that site that I just mentioned, let's go back and look at this pasuk here. Avraham stopped in Beit El. Here, let's start with this pasuk here first of all. After being in Shechem, it says, "Vayatek misham hahara." Avraham traveled further south through the mountain range along the road we just sort of, virtually traveled past what's today Tzomet Tapuach, past Shiloh to this area. Mikedem leBeit El. He didn't actually go to Beit El. He was east of Beit El. Beit El miyam v'ai mikedem. Beit El was to his west, and Ai was to his east. So he was somewhere near Beit El. And what did he do there? Vayiven sham mizbeach Hashem, vayikra b'shem Hashem. He built another mizbeach in the area of Beit El, and here he did something else, which we're going to read about a few times with Avraham. Vayikra b'shem Hashem. Avraham called out in the name of God. And what does that mean to call out in the name of God? It means that he started to teach people about the concept known as monotheism. And again, this is something I develop a lot in my Am Levadad series, and I invite you to take a look at it. I maintain that the idea of monotheism, which Avraham is credited both in rabbinic sources and in general world history as being the one who brought this message to the world, we'll see in a minute that Avraham was not the only monotheist in the world in his time, and he certainly wasn't the first monotheist. But in Avraham's time, most of the people in the world were polytheists. Most of the people in the world were pagans. Most of the people believed in multiple gods. And Avraham's great message was that there's only one God. And for Avraham, this was not simply about theology. It's not about mathematics. How many gods are there? Monotheism is a fundamentally different concept. Again, this is something that you can learn more about on my website. Monotheism is a fundamentally different concept than paganism and then modern atheism. Monotheism says that there's one God who created the entire universe, who rules the entire universe, who created all people in his image, and who commands all people to worship him and to live by certain principles of godliness, principles of ethics, of treating each person with the dignity and respect that's due to them as people who were created in the image of God, and also commands people to respect themselves and to live with a certain degree of holiness. Those are the messages that Avraham began to spread from his Mizbeach in Beit El, and those are also the messages that would bring God's blessings to the world. Messages of monotheism, I believe, are the blessings that Avraham was meant to bring to the world, and that his descendants were meant to lead the world in. And that institution, the Mishkan, and eventually the Beit HaMikdash that was to be built, ultimately is going to have a central role in disseminating those ideas. When Shlomo HaMelech built the first Beit HaMikdash, he said very clearly that it wasn't only for the Jews. It wasn't a Jewish temple. That's a mistake. He mentions in his tefillah, V'gam anochri asher lo me'amcha Yisraelu. Also for the non-Jew, the Gentiles coming from another nation, he also can come to the temple, and he also can pray there. And when we speak about the final Beit HaMikdash, Yeshayahu envisions a world. He sees all the people coming to his temple. Ki veiti ve'tfila yikarei lechol ha'amim. All of the nations are going to have this as a house of prayer. So it's fascinating that on the way from Shechem to to Beit El, where he would build his first two mizbachot, Avraham passed the future site of the Mishkan in Shiloh, which is a fundamental step towards building that Beit HaMikdash, which is itself a fundamental step towards the fulfillment of Abraham's mission. So the picture is starting to become a little bit clearer here. And here, when he got to Beit El, we're then told, Vayisa Avram haloch v'nasoa hanegba. Avraham traveled further south, and we know the story. He had to then leave Eretz Canaan completely because there was a famine. He went down to Egypt. In Egypt, they took his wife away, and he got her back, and eventually he came back all the way back to Beit El. So he left Beit El and he returned to Beit El, and it's in Beit El that he split up from Lot. And after separating from Lot, who went down to the area of Sodom, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. We read that Hashem told Avram, Acharei pared Lot beimo, Sana einech orei min hamakom asher atasham tzafona v'negba v'kedma v'yama. Avram was told to look in all four directions, north, south, east, and west. Ki et kol ha'aretz asher ata ro'eh lecha etnena. I'm giving this land to you, u'lezaracha ad olam. V'samti et zaracha ka'afar ha'aretz. You're going to have as many children as the dust of the earth. Hu mitalech ba'aretz, he was told. Walk up and down the land, it's all going to be yours. So this promise from Beit El was given to him in much greater detail than it was. He's promised that he's going to have many, many, many descendants, and as far as he can see in all directions is going to belong to him. And even though we haven't gotten there yet on our journey, let's also look at what was told later to Avraham when he got to Hebron. He was told, "L'zarach hanatati et haaretz hazot minahar Mitzrayim ad nahar gadol nahar Prat." Not only as far as he can see, but much further than that. He was promised from the Nile to the Euphrates. And here, this is a map which basically shows us with today. These are the different colors, and these kind of gray lines show you modern countries. The area that Avram was promised from the Nile to the Euphrates River includes much, much more than Avram could see from Beit El, and much more than we're used to considering as part of the land of Israel. In today's terms, it's part of Egypt, from everything east of the Nile, including the Sinai Peninsula, all of what we call Israel today, maybe a small piece of Saudi Arabia, all of what we call Jordan today, all of Lebanon, much of Syria, part of Iraq, and maybe even a small piece of Turkey. All of that was promised to Avraham, ultimately. So the promises are fantastic in terms of their scope. Descendants as numerous as this kafar arts, as the dust of the earth, and land that's much vaster than anything that historically to date has ever happened. Okay, so there's a future vision here that's yet to be realized. And again, I think the contrast between what Avram's promised and what he was actually experiencing again must be very, very jarring, as it has been throughout history. Again, holding on to Eretz Yisrael has always been very, very difficult. Even though all of this has been promised, and that dichotomy is something that we're going to have to understand as well. Once we're in Beit El, let's just take a quick peek at what we can see there. If we went up today, there's this nice tower where we could go up today and have a panoramic view where we can sort of try to understand a little bit of what it means when Avraham was told everything that you see. On a clear day, you can see it's on top of a mountain, and you can see quite far from there. And we could also go to this place which is known as Jacob's Rock, Atar Chalom Yaakov. There's a site here that some people think might be the place where Yaakov later had his dream. Whether that's actually true or not is somewhat skeptical, but there is a place that you can go and you can try to sort of imagine it. And what's there also is an ancient site, a large building that some think might be associated with the Mishkan. I'm sorry, not the Mishkan, but with the Mizbeach that Yeravam ben Nevat built. Much later on in history, after the Beit HaMikdash was built in Yerushalayim, there was a breakaway. Yeravam ben Nevat, and he built an illegal temple in Beit El. And he went to Beit El on purpose because Beit El had a history, right? That's where Avraham had been. And something that this structure that you're looking at here is in fact that temple. But I want to continue our journey down Road 60. So we'll go back to the road and we'll continue south from there. And here's a map of Avraham's journeys. Here's where he came in from Haran. We saw how he first came to Elon Moreh. We saw that he went to Beit El and went down to Egypt and came back. And we'll see later on, and we're going to talk more about this next week and the following week, he eventually gets to Hebron and to Beersheba. So these are the four main cities that Avraham spent his time in: Shechem, Beit El, Hebron, and Beersheba. And again, we'll talk more about Beersheba and Hebron next week and the following week. But there's one city, and we talked about Shiloh, which wasn't important in Avram's time. There's one city, though, that's very, very important, which Avram didn't seem to have gone to at all, or barely ever, and that, of course, is Yerushalayim. And this requires some understanding. Why did Avram spend so much time in Beit El and in Hebron and Beersheba? And the city that's going to be the ultimate Yerushalayim. Barely any mention of it in Sefer Bereishit. The truth is, the word Yerushalayim is not mentioned in Sefer Bereishit at all, but there are two references to it. The first is Akedat Yitzchak. Which actually did not happen in Yerushalayim. This is a drawing of the ancient city of Yerushalayim, the oldest part of Yerushalayim, which we'll talk more about in a minute. And this is Har HaMoriah. It's here on this mountain, which was outside of the city, that Avram brought Yitzchak to the Akedah. Only when Shlomo built the Beit HaMikdash later on in history was the city expanded to include this mountain. But at Avram's time, it was outside the city, but it's certainly very close to Yerushalayim. So that's one significant fact, that even though Avram never lived in Yerushalayim, he was brought to the Akedah on the spot that later eventually is where the Beit HaMikdash would be built. And this is what we're going to read about at the end of the Torah, that at a certain point in time, there's going to be this Makom Asher Yivchar Hashem, this place that God chooses, and that's where that future Beit HaMikdash is going to have to be built. And then there was also something else. Avraham fought a war to rescue Lot. You may recall there were 5 kings and 4 kings, and the whole area of stone was conquered, and they were taken as captives. Again, a scene that reverberates with us on this day, as thankfully just a few minutes ago we got the news that another group of hostages has been released, but so many of our people are still in hostage, and we're in the midst of fighting a war ultimately to get those hostages back. Avraham Avinu also fought a war to free hostages, and he was successful. And when he came back, we read here, "Vayashev et kol harechush v'gam et lo tachivu rechusho ishi v'gam et hanashim et am." He rescued all of the people, Lot, but not just Lot. He rescued all the captives, and he even managed to rescue all of their property. And he came back. And we read that two kings came to greet him. Vayetzei melech Sodom likrato, acharei shuvo me'akot et kedar la'omer, v'et hamalachim asher ito, el emek shavehu emek hamelech. Emek hamelech seems to be someplace very close to the city of Yerushalayim. And the king of Sodom came out to greet Avraham, and we understand exactly why. Avraham, after all, has just rescued all the people of Sodom, and the king of Sodom is here to sort of try to negotiate. And we'll see what the king of Sodom said in a second. But before we get to the king of Sodom and what he said, we have this parenthetical insertion that another king came to greet Avraham as well. And it's very interesting because we understand why the king of Sodom came. The king of Sodom, who managed to escape, but all of his people, he's the king of a city that doesn't exist right now. And all of the residents of Sodom and all of the property in Sodom is currently in Avraham's possession. And he's going to try to negotiate with Avraham or beg with Avraham to give him something that he can become the king of again. So we understand why he came. But there's another king who came who has nothing to do with this story. Umalkitzedek Melech Shalem, a king by the name of Malkitzedek, which is such a fascinating name. It means the king of righteousness. And he was the king of a place called Shalem. And here the rabbis tell us, and in this case, contemporary scholarship also agrees, that the city called here Shalem is in fact Yerushalayim. That same city that later on, just outside of it, Avraham would offer Yitzchak as a korban, or would be willing to offer Yitzchak as a korban. Of course, we know he ultimately didn't do that, right? He was told not to. But the king of Shalem, of Yerushalayim, whose name was Malkitzedek, comes out with bread and wine to greet Avraham. And we're told about him, V'hu Kohen Le'el Elyon. We're told about him that he was a Kohen, a priest of the one true God. It seems that Malkitzedek was the only monotheist, was one of the only other monotheists in the world at the time. A Kohen Le'el Elyon. And by Varcheu Vayomar, he blessed Avraham. Baruch Avram Le'el Elyon Konei Shamayim Va'aretz. He blessed Avraham in the name of this God, El Elyon. And it says here, Vayitein lo Maaser Mikol, that Avraham gave Malkitzedek, who was a Kohen, who was a priest to God. Avraham gave him Maaser. He gave him 10% of what he had taken, what he had received from the battle. And therefore we see that Avraham respected Malkitzedek. So we see that Avraham was not the only monotheist in the world at the time. There were a few others, and one of them, fascinatingly, was the king of that city where in the future the Beit HaMikdash was going to be built. But Avraham didn't build the Beit HaMikdash, and Malkitzedek didn't build the Beit HaMikdash, and Avraham didn't even settle in Yerushalayim. Avraham headed further south, as we're going to see here. We'll pick this up from here next week, headed further south. Along what we call today, he didn't go through tunnels. He went through the older part of the road, but he went further south towards the area of Hebron and ultimately Beersheba. So since we're basically out of time, let me just kind of sum this up by seeing the foundation that we laid today. We saw that Avraham was chosen to come from far away to Eretz Yisrael, and we sort of followed Avraham along the first part of his journey, from Shechem to Beit El, passing Shiloh, and then passing Yerushalayim. And we talked about Abraham's two brief encounters with the area of Yerushalayim, even though he never lived there. And both of those two encounters pointed towards that future Beit HaMikdash that would eventually be built there. Just as passing Shiloh perhaps presages the Mishkan that would be the prelude to that Beit HaMikdash. And we saw that those future temples are really the essence of what Avram's mission was. Avram's mission was to bring blessings to the entire world. It is for that he was chosen. And in his own lifetime, he managed to begin to carry that out by building Mizbachot, first in Shechem and then in Beit El. We'll see that he also did something similar, maybe even more elaborate in Beersheba, but we'll talk about that probably in 2 weeks. In connection with Yitzchak and ultimately Yaakov. There that he built those mizbachot, and vayikra b'shem Hashem, he called out in the name of God. He interfaced with Melchizedek Melech Shalem, and I took the pasuk off the screen. I meant to point out that afterwards, when Avraham speaks to Melech Sodom, they have this little negotiation, which I won't get into now. But Avraham also uses the expression El Elyon, but he adds the four-letter name of God. Melchizedek speaks of El Elyon, and Avraham speaks of Hashem El Elyon. And that's probably a little hint to the fact that Melchizedek may have been a monotheist, but his understanding of monotheism probably wasn't as developed as Avraham's was. Maybe not a full, complete monotheist in the fullest sense of the term, but something along the way. Perhaps understanding one God as ruling over the other gods, but not fully internalizing the concept that Avraham represented. That message, though, I believe, is the purpose of Avraham's life, the purpose for which he was chosen, and the purpose for which his children, his son Yitzchak and grandson Yaakov, and all of their descendants, including us, were chosen, and what the concept of chosen people really means. But we're out of time for tonight, so we'll develop these ideas further next week when we'll talk, God willing, about Yitzchak, and also take a quick little virtual tour of the city of Hebron via a video that I made in Hebron. And the following week, when we'll talk about Yaakov, and included in that, hopefully, will be a virtual tour of Bereishit. Okay, so that's what's coming up. And thank you very much. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to entertain them. Special hi to my father, who looks like he may have just managed to log in now, but he'll get the recording. And if any has any comments or questions, I'm happy to take them. And if not, I'll see you, God willing, next week.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. Thank you.